Hello, everybody. If you're watching this, then you missed our day 2 of week 11. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello. If you're watching this, you've missed day 2 of our week 11 lecture. Let's go ahead and get to it. We talked about documentation, comments, then I gave you some time to finish your apps, and then we looked at some variables. So let's go ahead and look at some assignments we have coming up. Hopefully you turned in your debugging assignment on code.org. That was due Thursday. Your app code is due Friday at midnight, and variable practice is going to be due next week. And we'll be starting on that today, but we'll have some time to work through it next week. You should be able to read and create appropriate code documentation. You should be using appropriate vocabulary to describe variables, expressions, and variable assignment. We're going to evaluate expressions, and we're going to trace simple programs that use variables. So a lot to do. To start off with, we took a look at some documentation. This is the AppLab API. This is essentially a library of everything that is available to you command-wise in this programming language. So you can explore it through here. Anytime you have a question about how do I do something, this could be your one-stop shop for all of those answers. Now, sometimes some of these commands are a little bit difficult to find, so Google is also your best friend for most programming languages. Now, an API is really important to most programming languages. It stands for Application Programming Interface. Essentially, it's just a library of procedures. Procedures are code you can call or ask your computer to execute, and then an explanation to how to actually use each line of code available to you. So very important that you know this vocabulary term. Now, inside your actual program, you sometimes might want to add some documentation yourself. You would do that using a comment. A comment is created by doing 2 forward slashes, followed by whatever note you want to leave for yourself, and that'll be read just as a text or a plain documentation that the computer is not going to try to interpret as code to be run. So we'll talk more in depth later on in the year about what kind of comments I'll be expecting from you. For now, you can use these to keep track of vital information as you're developing to help yourselves out. Later on, we'll have a more formalized series of comments I'll be expecting for certain parts of your program. Now let's talk about variables. You can explore some variable examples of programs that use them inside of lesson 1 in unit 4. So there's some bubbles there, 2, 3, and 4 have examples. Highly recommend you go and check them out. Now, usually we run this activity as a hands-on activity where we use sticky notes to represent values and Ziploc bags to represent variables. You could just imagine you have those. There's also a virtual manipulatives section posted here on MyMCPS. So if you want to play with them, you can do here, variable manipulatives. Alrighty. So what are variables? Let's look at it. Variables are going to be storing values. There's different kinds of values you can have in computer science. We're going to use yellow sticky notes to represent numbers and salmon-colored ones to represent strings. A string is just a series of characters, that's usually words, that's read out literally as it's written. So oftentimes, programming languages will have what's called typing, where you can tell a variable ahead of time what kind of information it'll be storing. So you might say, oh, you should store a number, or you should store a single character, or you're going to store a string. JavaScript doesn't have that. In JavaScript, a variable can hold whatever the heck you would like to put in there. So the problem with that is sometimes you can have an error because you unexpectedly put something in there you shouldn't have. So you have to be very careful in JavaScript and police yourself because the language won't do it for you. Now with regular numbers, you can do regular math. So if you have 2 values that are numbers, you can add them together, you can subtract, multiply, divide, all of that is allowed for you. Something interesting happens when we throw words in there. So strings can also be added together. If you add 2 strings together, they undergo what's called concatenation, meaning they're stuck together. So 4 plus ever gives you forever. if you try to put a number and a string together, and you put addition between them, that is still allowed. And what the computer will do is it'll concatenate the two. It'll say, okay, this must be now a string, and it'll simply stick them together and make the whole result a string. So it'll be GR and then 8 stuck to the back. And same thing if you do it the other way. Obviously, the order doesn't matter if you're using addition. What you don't want to try to do is you don't want to try to subtract a string from a string. So if you try to do forever minus ever, that'll give you an error. It will not work. So be careful. The only possible arithmetic, quote unquote, you can do with strings is adding them together like that. Now, a variable you can think of like a little Ziploc bag that can hold one value at a time. You are going to be naming your variable. You can name it anything you like, so long as there's no quotes or special characters whatsoever in there, so no dollar signs, percentages, anything like that. And you can't start it with a number or have any spaces in it. So you can have numbers, you just can't have the number be the first character in your string. So, for instance, we could have a variable, we'll call it zip, it holds 2. That's fine. You could have a variable called whoop, it holds high. Anything like that is totally allowed. Inside your program, you can then refer to your variables, and the computer will substitute whatever the value is stored inside there. So if you write out 3 plus zip, the computer will go, okay, what's inside zip? 5. Okay, great. So the answer will be 8. Similarly, you could do multiple variables combined together. So bop plus zip, well, bop is high, zip is 5, so it evaluates to high 5. Concatenates them together as a string. You can do other evaluations. Obviously, you can do addition, subtraction, division, so long as everything involved is a integer or a number and not a string. So 3 times boo, 3 times 4 is 12, rar plus ep will be beep, and then b plus 4 is b4. Now, how do we actually write this? You would need to use the keyword var, V-A-R, to indicate to the computer that we would like to declare a variable. Then you name your variable, and then afterwards, you're going to assign that variable a value. Oftentimes, we use this arrow to signify assignment when we're writing out pseudocode. Also, the AP folk use this in their version of AP pseudocode, which is what's on the AP exam. So if you see this, this means assignment. It means, we often read it as POW gets 3. That means store 3 inside the POW Ziploc bag. You're allowed to do assignment multiple times. So this is legal. I could assign 3 in there, and then if I wanted to put 5 in there afterwards, you can say that. What will happen is 3 will be thrown out forever, and it will be gone. And we'll put 5 in its place. So be very careful. If you wanted to do something important with this 3, you should have done that before you assigned the 5 in there. Let's look at this last program here. So if we say var pizza, store 3 inside there, var tacos, and then we put yum in pizza, the 3 is lost forever, and then the best is stored inside tacos. Notice that you have to define your variable before you assign to it. If you try to do this before saying what pizza is, that it's a variable, your computer will give you an error. So watch out for that. All right, the last thing I'd like to point out is be very careful. If you put numbers in quotes, they do become strings. So if you do 3 plus 4, you're going to get 34. Very counterintuitive, but you made these be strings, so the computer does not treat them as numbers. So careful where you use the quotes. The quotes are really important to point out where the strings are. If you put them around everything willy-nilly, you're going to run into this sort of thing, which you clearly don't want. All right, guys, thank you for coming. I'll see you next week.